In the beginning, before kings carved their names into stone, before cities rose from mud brick foundations, before the first priest ever raised his hands toward the heavens and whispered the names of lost gods, there was only the land between the rivers. A quiet, fertile crescent carved by the Tigris and the Euphrates, where reeds sang in the wind, where the sun painted gold over marsh waters, where the first humans tilled the earth in simplicity. The days were long, the nights full of stars. People lived as wanderers, as hunters, as gatherers of barley and dates. They lived close to the land, and the land, they believed, was watched over by beings who were not entirely of this world. And so the earliest stories began. Stories told around fires, stories murmured by elders, stories carved into clay thousands of years later. They spoke of figures who descended from the skies, clothed in radiance, wielding knowledge humanity could not yet imagine. Figures who guided, commanded, taught, and sometimes punished. Figures called the Anunnaki, the princes of heaven, the beings who linked the worlds of sky and earth. The land itself seemed shaped by myth. Storms came suddenly. Rivers rose without warning. The plain could shift from calm to chaos in a single season. The people believed nothing in their world was random. Everything was the will of unseen cosmic rulers. These ancient Sumerians, the first civilization to leave written records, insisted that their achievements were not their own, but gifted by the Anunnaki in a forgotten dawn age. No story of humanity is older than theirs. When the first archaeologists uncovered Sumerian tablets in the late 1800s, they expected primitive tales. Instead, they found a civilization astonishingly advanced, too advanced, according to some. The tablets spoke of mathematics based on precise sexagesimal systems, of astronomical observations still accurate today, of medical procedures, of laws, of irrigation networks, of ziggurats aligned to celestial bodies. But even more astonishing were the claims that this knowledge was handed down by divine beings who once lived among the people. These beings had names, personalities, rivalries, and histories spanning thousands of years. Anu, king of the heavens; Enlil, lord of storms and destiny; Enki, god of water, wisdom, and creation; Ninhursag, mother of mountains; Inanna, queen of heaven, goddess of love and war; Udu, the radiant sun; Nanna, the gentle moon. And among them were 50 great Anunnaki, celestial rulers who governed domains, cities, and cosmic forces. To the ancient Sumerians, these were not symbolic myths, these were memories. Their oldest city, Eridu, was believed to be the first place where the gods touched the earth. It was the home of Enki, the creator and protector of humanity, whose temple stood at the heart of the marshlands. Eridu's earliest levels show no signs of gradual development. Instead, it appears suddenly as a fully organized settlement, as if constructed deliberately, following a plan. The Sumerians said the plan came from heaven. As cities grew, so did the influence of the Anunnaki. Each city-state had a patron deity, an Anunnaki lord whose presence shaped the city's fate. In Nippur, Enlil ruled with stern authority, deciding the destinies of kings. In Uruk, Inanna's presence sparked innovation, culture, and passion. In Nanna calmed the tides of life. In Lagash, Ningirsu demanded discipline and war readiness. The people built towering ziggurats to house the gods, not as homes, but as cosmic link points between heaven and earth. The Sumerians believed that the Anunnaki had come to Earth long before humans existed. They described a world where these beings governed, divided territories, and worked the land. But over time, the lesser gods, called the Igigi, grew weary of labor. They rebelled in a dramatic celestial uprising against the elder gods. Faced with mutiny, the Anunnaki sought a solution to relieve themselves of toil. This is where one of the oldest and most mysterious myths emerges. The Atrahasis epic, preserved on clay, describes a secret meeting among the gods. Enki the Cunning proposed creating a new being, one capable of performing labor on behalf of the divine. This being would be shaped from clay mixed with the divine essence, something taken from the gods themselves. Ninhursag, the great mother deity, oversaw the process. They formed creation chambers, mixing biological components and molding forms. Their first attempts failed. Some beings were malformed, others sterile, others incomplete. After trial and error, they succeeded. A new species was born. Humanity. Whether this story is symbolic or reflective of something else remains debated. But its structure, creation through biological blending, trial-based development, deliberate shaping, has fascinated scholars and alternative researchers for decades. According to the Sumerians, humans were not created in perfection but for purpose. They were designed to serve, to irrigate fields, build temples, manage offerings, and maintain order. Yet Enki, unlike the stricter Enlil, saw humanity as more than servants. He taught them writing, mathematics, music, and craftsmanship. He gave them the divine laws and arts that governed civilization. Under his guidance, humans became creative, intelligent, and capable of building cities that would astonish future ages. As humanity flourished, divine politics grew turbulent. Enlil viewed humanity as noisy, troublesome, and dangerously independent. He attempted to curb their growth, first through droughts, then through plagues, each counteracted by Enki, who secretly provided humanity with ways to survive. This conflict culminated in the most dramatic event in ancient myth, the Great Flood. According to Sumerian tablets, the flood was not a natural disaster but a decision made by the Divine Council, led by Enlil. He intended to wipe out humanity once and for all. But Enki defied the edict by speaking through a wall to warn Atrahasis, a wise and righteous man. Enki instructed him to build a boat sealed with bitumen with provisions for survival. When the floodwaters rose and engulfed cities, drowning the noise of humanity, Atrahasis lived on, preserving life. After the flood, the Anunnaki were forced to reconsider humanity's role. Enlil's wrath gave way to compromise. Enki's compassion gave way to restraint. They divided humanity into groups, assigned rulers, and established laws to maintain balance. Civilization began anew, with the Anunnaki stepping back from direct rule, allowing kings to serve as intermediaries. These stories form the backbone of Sumerian religion. They shaped kingship, ethics, rituals, and identity. But beneath the poetic language lies a deeper question. What did the Sumerians actually experience that inspired these narratives? Why did they believe their gods were real, physical beings who once lived among them? Some scholars argue that the Anunnaki were simply deified ancestors, elevated kings, or forces of nature. Yet the consistency of their descriptions across thousands of tablets, names, personalities, family trees, roles, suggests something more structured than random myth. Others propose that the stories encode memories of an earlier advanced culture, one lost before recorded history. Still, others suggest that these beings may have been interpreted through the lens of limited human understanding. Whatever they were, they left a mark too deep to dismiss. The most striking evidence lies not in myths but in the sudden emergence of civilization. The Sumerians themselves claimed they did not invent writing, they said it was given to them. They did not claim to discover irrigation, they said they were instructed. They did not claim to devise law, they said it descended from the gods. They insisted their knowledge came from a higher source. Their temples were not merely places of worship, they were administrative, astronomical, and scientific centers. Ziggurats were aligned with stars. Priests tracked planetary motions with precision. Clay tablets cataloged medicinal plants, surgical tools, and diagnostic procedures. Their mathematics formed the basis of geometry and timekeeping. They calculated eclipses, solstices, and orbital patterns. They described constellations and listed planets far beyond what the naked eye could detect. Where did all this come from? A puzzle unravels when we look at the Sumerian king list, a document that records rulers from before the flood. These kings were said to have reigned for thousands of years each, reigns dismissed as symbolic exaggeration by mainstream historians. Yet the Sumerians emphasized that these figures were real, living beings with divine ancestry. The list was not intended as myth, but as historical record. After the flood, reigns became shorter, more human. But the idea remained. Kingship was a divine institution bestowed by the Anunnaki. Across the ancient world, similar themes appear. Egyptian gods descended to teach civilization. Hindu texts describe sky beings who brought knowledge. Native American legends speak of star people who taught agriculture. Aboriginal Australians tell of sky heroes who shaped the land. In nearly every ancient culture, the beginning of civilization is linked to a descent. Someone came down, taught, guided, then departed. The Sumerians were simply the first to write it down. Over time, the Anunnaki receded from daily life. Their presence became symbolic. Their temples became echoes. Their statues were buried in sand. Their stories were passed through Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, and eventually found their way into the myths of Hebrews, Greeks, and others. Enki became E in Babylon, then Ons to the Greeks. Inanna became Ishtar, then Astarte, then Aphrodite. Udu became Shamas, then Samas. The identities evolved, but the core remained. Why did they fade? Some believe it was cultural evolution. Others believe it was deliberate withdrawal. Many legends describe the gods ascending to the heavens, promising to return. The ancient Sumerians built their lives around this expectation. Their temples faced the sky. Their rites called to the sky. Their prayers held longing for a time when the Anunnaki walked among them, guiding humanity into an age of brilliance. Today, as we study their ruins, translate their tablets, and reconstruct their world, we find ourselves confronting the same questions they asked. Who shaped the earliest civilizations? Why does human history begin with sudden leaps? Why do ancient myths from across the world align so closely? What did the Sumerians witness that led them to carve their truths so boldly into clay? The answers lie buried still, waiting beneath deserts, beneath ruins, beneath our own assumptions. The story of the Anunnaki is not simply a tale of gods. It is a tale of humanity's origins, humanity's fears, humanity's hopes. It is the first attempt to understand the unknown. Whether these beings were gods, ancestors, visitors, or metaphors, their impact shaped the very foundation of human culture. And the mystery only deepens when we continue exploring the later eras, when the gods withdrew, when kings rose, when wars erupted, when celestial omens shaped destinies. The story does not end with the flood. It grows more complex, more dramatic, more puzzling. Because after the flood, the Anunnaki did not disappear completely. They returned, and humanity entered an age unlike any before. In the aftermath of the flood, the world changed its face and its rulers changed their tactics. The Anunnaki, who had once walked the streets and ordered the canals, receded from constant inspection of human life. They established boundaries, set the laws by which kings should rule, and then, as tablets and laments insist, they ascended to their celestial stations. But their departure did not mean abandonment. Their involvement became ritualized, translated into priestly duties, astronomical omens, and legal codes that matched the gods' will. Temples became the place where human and divine knew how to negotiate their relationship, where the trials of kingship were shaped by the divine sanction that had been handed down. Kingship, politics, and religion fused. The ruler was king and servant, an intermediary who maintained order and received the divine right to govern. Across the plain, the instruments of civilization matured. What had been taught, irrigation, writing, law, the catalogs of crafts and rituals became human practice. But the record remained stubbornly clear that the original impulse came from outside human invention. The first scribes, who wrote on clay with reed styluses, recorded a history that always began with the Anunnaki. They wrote lists of divine decrees. They wrote about the divine properties that made society possible, from music to kingship to weaving to the law that judged theft. Human artisans and scribes copied and measured, and in doing so, they preserved the memory of a civilization that claimed descent from the sky. With time came cities, and with cities came competition. City-states such as Uruk and Lagash vied for supremacy. They built walls of baked brick and temples that rose like stairways to the sky. They minted objects, crafted statues, wrote hymns to gods who once taught them metallurgy and the secrets of alloying copper and tin into bronze. The Bronze Age that followed seemed to validate the tablets. Complex metallurgy, long-distance trade, and coordinated labor projects that required planning and shared knowledge. The Anunnaki, if they ever physically walked the earth, had set in motion a cascade of skills and organizational precepts that allowed human societies to step into an age of industry and exchange. Not all scholars accept a literal reading. Yet even those who prefer symbolism struggle to explain the rapid accumulation of technical knowledge across the region. How did small river communities learn geometry that allowed for levees, canal alignment, and monumental architecture? How did they develop a base 60 system that persists in our hours and degrees to this day? These were not incremental zooms forward, but leaps in applied abstraction. The Sumerians solved practical problems with elegant mathematical formulations and recorded them as teaching documents for future generations. In the code echoed an origin myth. The teachers were divine. The Anunnaki myths did something else. They provided a structure for political legitimacy. Rulers used divine genealogy to justify authority. The tablet kings claimed descent from the godly order. The royal inscriptions traced linkages to the Anunnaki as if to show continuity with the original cosmic designers. When rulers renovated temples or erected new ziggurats, they were not only performing piety, they were enacting the same divine plan. The political theology was a mechanism for cohesion, and it worked extraordinarily well. It gave nascent states a reason to obey central authority and to cooperate on large engineering feats. Farmers would build dikes, leaders would store grain, armies would defend trade routes, all in the shadow of a cosmos that had already been ordered by the Anunnaki. Beyond political theory, the tablet lore also records technology and medicine with a level of precision that suggests practical sophistication. Medical texts describe diagnoses, surgical tools, and herbal remedies. Astronomical observations recorded planetary positions and cyclical periods. Lawyers recorded economic transactions and stipulations of trade. All these were bound within a frame that named teachers and patrons who had once stood at a threshold between sky and earth. Thus, knowledge carried theological sanction. Scholarship was not merely a craft, but a continuation of divine pedagogy. What of the physical traces? Archaeology provides tantalizing evidence. Sites reveal organized urban planning, large storage facilities indicating surplus agriculture, and elaborate burial practices that suggest complex social stratification. Temples, with their astronomical alignments and ritual spaces, show a people who thought deeply about cosmic order. Artifacts carved with sophisticated iconography, cylinder seals bearing scenes of divine-human exchange, and inscriptions describing sacred rites testify to a culture that recorded its history seriously. The Anunnaki names and genealogies repeat across different city lists and hymns, suggesting a coherent mythic corpus rather than a loose aggregation of folk tales. Then there are the myths of return. Even when the great temple complexes fell into disrepair, when invasions swept through, or when the political landscape fractured, the idea of return remained potent. Priests spoke of the heavens opening, of celestial boats returning, of signs in the sky that would herald the gods' reappearance. That persistent image shaped ritual calendars and political rhetoric alike. Kings would claim unusual omens as confirmation of their favor with the Anunnaki. We see in the Assyrian records and later Babylonian literature faint echoes of older Sumerian traditions, rephrased and recontextualized for shifting dynasties. The reinterpretation of Anunnaki figures across cultures is significant. As power centers shifted from Sumer to Akkad to Babylon, the gods took on new names and emphasized different attributes suited to each state's political needs. Enki became E, Enlil remained stern and decisive. Inanna transformed into Ishtar, goddess of fertility, war, and political patronage. The myths traveled like seeds on the wind, germinating in new soils. Each culture adapted the narrative to justify its own political order and to make sense of cosmic events, eclipses, comets, and climatic shifts that could be read as divine messages. An intriguing line of inquiry has to do with the portrayal of tools and weapons in myth. Some texts describe the radiant weapon, or fire that devours, descriptions of devices that discharge brilliant radiance, or that make the heavens tremble appear in several Sumerian passages. Whether these are poetic metaphors, early descriptions of natural phenomena such as meteor strikes, or memory of more advanced technology, the language evokes effects that would later be described in very different contexts. The way these passages are framed, through the eyes of terrified witnesses who speak of the sky's fury, reinforces the notion that ancient people recorded extraordinary events without a modern vocabulary. Hence, they used theological imagery. But even that imagery remains vivid and strangely technological in flavor. Around the second millennium, other empires arose: Hittites in Anatolia, Hurrians in the north, the Canaanite systems to the west, and each preserved fragments of this deep memory. In the Levantan and Anatolian myths, there are references to gifts from above, to teachers who brought arts, and to carriers of knowledge that sound like the same family of narratives. The diffusion of such motifs across a broad arc from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean suggests either a powerful cultural current or a shared memory of events that left an imprint across the ancient Near East. Trade networks and political conquest spread not only goods but also stories, and those stories carried concepts that sculpted emerging worldviews. Because the tales carried practical consequences, institutions developed around them. Priesthoods became custodians of texts and astronomical knowledge. They measured the sky's movements to calculate planting cycles, to adjudicate legal matters, and to install rulers in a semblance of divine order. A temple archive could contain economic records, star charts, medical treatises, and mythic hymns, documents that bound the world's mechanics to a recognized divine origin. In that sense, the Anunnaki became both memory and instruction manual. They were narrative and technology wrapped into one. Another dimension to the Anunnaki narrative is its ethical structure. The myths do not present gods as morally flawless. The Anunnaki were capricious, jealous, and sometimes vindictive. Their quarrels produced plagues and floods. Their judgments could be harsh. Yet at the same time, the myths value cunning, wisdom, and compassion. Enki's interventions to save humankind are celebrated as virtues. This ambivalent portrayal allowed rulers and priests to interpret divine will in ways that were flexible. The gods punished to instruct rather than merely to annihilate. The mythic structure thus provided a moral vocabulary to explain suffering, natural disaster, and societal upheaval, while also granting moral precedents for compassion and mercy. When the great empires rose and fell, new mythic chapters folded the old ones into their narratives. The flood story, for example, evolved in Babylonian hands into the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the hero's quest for immortality is bound to an encounter with Utnapishtim, the flood survivor. The Ark narrative found resonance in Hebrew scripture, morphing into new theological meanings. Gradually, the Anunnaki concept branched into ancestral spirits, angels, and other intermediary beings. The underlying human question remained constant: who delivered us from chaos and who controls destiny? Modern researchers take disparate approaches. Assyriologists parse the tablet language to reconstruct cult practices and calendrical systems. Archaeologists peel back layer after layer of settlement to map out economic systems. Comparative mythologists trace motifs across continents. Alternative scholars propose that the Anunnaki stories are records of contact with non-human intelligences, perhaps visitors from beyond, and point to recurrent themes such as sudden technological leaps, unusual astronomical detail, and the anthropogenic creation myth as possible clues. Skeptics counter forcefully. They emphasize the human capacity for symbolic thought. Gods are metaphors for natural forces. Sacerdotal classes invented divine origin to consolidate control. Boasting inscriptions exaggerated the feats of kings. They point out that technological emergence can occur through gradual innovation, social cooperation, and diffusion via trade processes for which there is substantial archaeological evidence. The debate centers on interpretation. Is the earliest writing a literal chronicle of extraterrestrial mentoring, or is it a poetic explanation produced by mortal minds struggling to make sense of abrupt cultural transformations? It is vital to acknowledge the documentary clarity in the tablets. The Sumerians were meticulous record keepers. Royal inscriptions, administrative archives, and omen texts show a civilization intent on precision. Whether describing the harvest or celestial phenomena, they wrote to remember. That habit of recording itself is a legacy of the Anunnaki myth. If the gods had given writing, then writing's primary purpose was to bind the past and future to a shared memory. And so the Sumerians cataloged the world, its taxes, its temples, its star charts, and in doing so they bequeathed to us an archive that has proved remarkably durable. The physical story continued in waves of empire. The Akkadian Empire under Sargon unified much of Mesopotamia, blending Sumerian and Akkadian traditions. Babylonian consolidation under Hammurabi created legal codes echoing the older notion of order handed from gods to men. The Hittite, the Hurrian, and the Assyrian states adapted and transmitted, layer upon layer, until the Near Eastern cultural mosaic had been forged. Each of these polities preserved fragments of the same mythic kit: divine teachers, cosmic floods, gift-bearing sky beings. It is a testament to the narrative's durability that it could be reshaped and yet remain recognizable across millennia. Even today, the resonance of these stories is apparent. Contemporary writers and filmmakers draw on the Anunnaki motif when imagining ancient astronauts, hidden knowledge, or vanished civilizations. The motif endures because it addresses the deepest human anxieties and hopes, the fear that we were not born fully sovereign, and the hope that our origins link us to something greater. It provides context for our knowledge systems, for our sacred prescriptions, and for the technologies that now define modern life. If the Sumerian account is mythic framing, it remains a powerful one. If it contains traces of memory, then those traces must be pursued with respect for both evidence and imagination. We can, with justified caution, derive 3 concrete lessons from the Sumerian corpus. First, that the dawn of civilization involved concentrated bursts of technical and organizational innovation that require explanation through social complexity and knowledge transmission. Second, that mythic narratives encapsulate social memory in forms that are not purely metaphorical. They package and preserve information for future generations. Third, that the thoroughness of Sumerian documentation allows us to study the interplay between ritual, politics, and technology in the pre-modern world in ways that are rare and illuminating. And yet the biggest question remains. If the Anunnaki were beings that influenced human affairs at the dawn of civilization, why did their role recede? Several possibilities present themselves. Ecological change might have altered the region's capacity to support large complexes. Political fragmentation might have dispersed temple economies, making centralized divine oversight less practical. Psychological evolution, our species' own cognitive shift, could have internalized what were once external instructions, transforming gods into concepts and teachers into traditions. Or, in more speculative frameworks, the Anunnaki might have been intentionally transient, fulfilling a role until human societies could sustain themselves independently. What is beyond dispute is that the Anunnaki myth shaped the trajectory of human civilization and offered a coherent framework for making sense of abrupt complexity. The Sumerians' commitment to recording, cataloging, and ritualizing the gods' instructions allowed for durable institutions that could survive war and famine. In that light, The Anunnaki can be read as an origin myth that functioned expertly. It provided legitimacy, knowledge, social cohesion, and a way to interpret chaos. Whether divine or metaphorical, those are functions any nascent complex society would value immensely. As our knowledge deepens and archaeology uncovers new sites, the old fragments may assemble into more coherent pictures, or not. The desert still hides tablets and ruins that could nuance or dramatically alter our interpretations. For now, the Anunnaki remain a threshold, a crossing point between how ancient peoples explain themselves and how modern scholars piece together the past. Their legacy is at once cultural, technological, and mythic, threading through the earliest written history and into the stories that followed. If you listen carefully to the Sumerian hymns and lamentations, if you watch the star maps carved into temple walls, if you read the king list's strange numbers, you hear a civilization trying to remember its beginnings with the only instruments it had: story, ritual, and writing. The Anunnaki are the articulating mechanism of those memories, and through them we glimpse a world in which human origins were not just biological but cultural, learned, and bestowed. From the moment the first cities rose from the mud of the southern plains, humanity carried a sense of debt it could never quite repay. The stories of the Anunnaki were whispered in homes, inscribed on tablets, carved on reliefs, and reenacted in daily ritual. People believed their ancestors had not risen from barbarism by chance. They had been elevated, instructed, shaped. This belief entered every layer of life. The way farmers aligned their fields with celestial bodies, the way carpenters measured their beams, the way priests calculated festival dates, the way kings defined justice. Even when the physical presence of the sky gods faded from living memory, the structure they imposed endured. Civilization, once taught, did not need constant supervision. It inherited momentum, carried by each new generation that believed it was stewarding a design older than any man or kingdom. In the great cities, the temple towers rose in defiance of time. Ziggurats stood like synthetic mountains, human-built staircases between earth and heaven. Their bricks, millions of them, bore stamps of kings who claimed divine mandate, but the architecture itself pointed to older designs. Priests climbed their steps not only to perform rituals, but to observe the heavens, as if expecting to catch a glimpse of the ancient teachers returning through the glittering canopy of stars. Each night they mapped constellations, tracked wandering planets, and interpreted the celestial configurations for signs. They believed the sky was a message board left behind by the Anunnaki when they withdrew into the higher realms, a complex code whose patterns informed agriculture, warfare, and political legitimacy. Astronomy blended with theology. A planet's slow drift through the zodiac was a divine whisper. A solar eclipse was an urgent warning. A comet slicing across the heavens was a message too powerful to ignore. For the people of the ancient Near East, the cosmos had always been alive, conscious, intentional. The gods had walked upon the earth. Logical, then, that they still rode across the heavens. Meanwhile, trade routes expanded like veins carrying lifeblood across continents. Merchants from the Persian Gulf set sail along the coastline, their ships stopping in lands that the earliest tablets called Dilmun, Magan, and Meluha. These traders carried copper, lapis lazuli, incense, grain, and wool. But they carried something else also: stories. Tales of the Anunnaki journeyed across mountains and deserts, carried by caravan and ship, morphing as they reached new ears. Some heard the gods described as shining beings with radiant eyes. Others heard of winged figures descending in fiery chariots. In distant lands, people blended these stories with their own traditions, creating hybrid mythologies that preserved the essential idea: advanced beings once shaped humanity. Even as cultures evolved independently, parallels appeared with striking regularity. Pyramids rose in Egypt. Massive ceremonial platforms appeared in South America. Star-lined temples emerged across the Mediterranean. Modern scholars explain this convergence through shared human psychology or similar environmental challenges. Yet ancient people themselves would have given a different explanation. The world had once been instructed by a common source. The echo of the Anunnaki stretched far beyond Mesopotamia, carried not by armies or empires, but by the human instinct to preserve the memory of something extraordinary. As the centuries unfolded, some rulers exploited this memory for control. Others genuinely believed they upheld a sacred contract. The tension between divine right and human ambition played out repeatedly in palace halls and on battlefields. A king who failed could claim divine displeasure. A successful king pointed to omens that confirmed celestial support. In this dance of politics and prophecy, the Anunnaki remained both silent and omnipresent. They did not intervene visibly, but their shadow shaped decisions that affected the fate of millions. Perhaps the most enigmatic aspect of the ancient record is the sudden sophistication of certain texts. Clay tablets found in Nippur, Sippar, and Nineveh contain star lists, planetary cycles, and mathematical methods that defy easy explanation. How did early scribes determine the synodic periods of planets with such accuracy, especially when these cycles require decades of patient observation? How did they predict eclipses with methods that resemble later Greek and Babylonian systems? Some researchers propose that the knowledge developed slowly over generations. Others believe the base knowledge was inherited from an earlier, forgotten stage of civilization, a stage the Sumerians preserved through their myths of divine instruction. The most haunting example is the Sumerian king list, which claims that before the Great Flood, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years. These enormous spans baffle historians, who dismiss them as symbolic or legendary exaggeration. But the Sumerians wrote them alongside more mundane administrative records, suggesting that they drew from their own cultural memory rather than inventing arbitrary numbers. Perhaps the long reigns reflect periods in which the kings were not human kings at all, but Anunnaki rulers, beings with lifespans far exceeding those of mortal men. If the list preserves even a distorted memory of a pre-flood age, it might hint at a world in which time itself flowed differently, or in which human scribes attempted to record events from an era they did not fully understand. Archaeological excavations continue to reveal surprises. Beneath the layers of later civilizations, remnants of older structures appear with mere fragments of inscriptions. Some contain symbols unfamiliar even to experts in Sumerian cuneiform, suggesting transitional periods or proto-scripts that never survived in common use. Tools, beads, pottery styles, and burial customs sometimes appear abruptly, not gradually, an indication of cultural influx or sudden innovation. These transitions remain subjects of debate, and though conventional explanations exist, the mythic perspective interprets them differently. They mark moments when the Anunnaki intervened, corrected, or recalibrated the course of human development. As civilizations expanded, they also encountered catastrophe. Droughts transformed fertile lands into dust. Earthquakes toppled temples and city walls. Invaders swept across plains with iron weapons and new tactics. Each time disaster struck, people looked to the heavens, searching for signs of abandonment or displeasure. The laments of for example, describe a scene in which the gods leave the city, abandoning it to destruction. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, the poem captures a psychological shock, the feeling that the cosmic order had been ruptured. In moments of ruin, people believed they had lost their ancient protectors. Yet the memory never faded. Even as some gods were replaced by new deities, the idea of celestial ancestors persisted. In Babylon, the rites of Marduk absorbed older Sumerian traditions, but the connection to the Anunnaki underworld and the assembly of heaven remained. In Assyria, kings depicted themselves receiving weapons and inscriptions directly from winged figures, echoes of the older divine-human relationships. These images adorned palace walls, carved into stone in exquisite detail, portraying encounters between rulers and beings who radiated authority and knowledge. Whether these depictions were symbolic or historical, they affirmed lineage. The kings ruled not simply by might, but by inheritance from the ancient sky beings. In the Hebrew tradition, the Nephilim narrative and the sons of God, descending to earth, bear resemblance to the older Sumerian accounts. Some ancient rabbis described angels teaching humanity techniques of metalworking, cosmetics, agriculture, and warfare, the same arts attributed to divine figures in Mesopotamian stories. In Greek mythology, the Titans and Olympians recount similar structures, celestial beings who shaped the world and then withdrew, leaving humans to govern themselves. It is as if every ancient culture preserved a fragment of the same ancestral memory, refracted through its own lens. In Persia, the Ahura Mazda tradition preserved the idea of celestial wisdom givers. In India, the Devas and Rishis imparted sacred knowledge. In Egypt, the god Thoth carried the role of scribe and instructor, guiding humans in mathematics, writing, and magic. Even in ancient China, legends describe the sky teachers, the sons of heaven, who bestowed civilization upon early dynasties. Though separated by vast distances and independent cultural evolution, the stories align in structural themes: beings from above, instruction of humanity, withdrawal, and the promise of future return. The return motif is among the most compelling. Ancient people believed that cosmic cycles governed the gods' appearances. Periods of alignment, eclipses, or celestial conjunctions were interpreted as signs that the ancient teachers might return. Some texts describe an age when the Anunnaki will once again descend, restoring order after a time of turmoil. These prophecies fueled rituals, temple calendars, and political aspirations. A king seeking legitimacy would emphasize omens predicting renewed divine favor. When rulers failed catastrophically, people assumed the gods had withheld their guidance. This longing for return infused ancient culture with a sense of destiny. It gave structure to time, shaping history into cycles rather than linear progression. Even today, echoes of this cyclic worldview remain. The idea of golden ages lost, of forgotten knowledge waiting to be recovered, of catastrophic resets after which the world is reborn. In the present age, scholars meticulously piece together shards of pottery, broken inscriptions, and architectural remnants. From these fragments they reconstruct economies, religious practices, and political systems. Yet the most enigmatic aspect remains the psychology of ancient people who lived under the belief that their civilization originated from beings not of this world. That collective memory, whether rooted in fact or myth, shaped their creativity, their ambition, and their fear. The earliest cities were not merely built for human needs. They were designed as cosmic replicas, microcosms of an ordered universe handed down from a divine blueprint. Consider the city of Ur, laid out with ceremonial precision, its ziggurat rising over administrative quarters, workshops, and storerooms. The design mirrored the heavens, aligning with stars observed for generations. To ancient architects, this alignment was not aesthetic. It was a requirement, a continuation of ancient instructions. The idea that the gods taught humanity how to structure society conferred sacred meaning on every brick, every measurement, every courtyard. Cities became living temples, embodiments of a cosmic order established in the earliest ages. Over time, the memory of these origins faded into symbolism, and symbolism into legend. But the artifacts remain. Excavated tablets preserve lists of star names and calculations of planetary cycles. Ritual instructions detail purification rites meant to bridge human and divine realms. Hymns praise gods who once walked among men, their footsteps remembered in temple thresholds. Each artifact, however small, preserves a whisper of the ancient worldview. Modern translators, holding clay tablets inscribed thousands of years ago, sometimes describe a peculiar sensation, as if the voices of scribes long dead speak through the cuneiform signs. Those voices describe a world in which the boundaries between mortal and divine were far more permeable than we imagine today. The scribes believed they were recording history, not fiction. They preserved the memories of kings who met celestial beings, of disasters that reshaped continents, of revelations that opened the way for agriculture, mathematics, and law. Yet even with all the evidence we possess, the nature of the Anunnaki remains elusive. Were they entirely mythological, embodiments of natural forces and psychological archetypes? Were they legendary memories of early human innovators whose deeds became exaggerated over time? Or were they, as some alternative researchers suggest, non-human intelligences who guided humanity in its early development? The documentary evidence, paradoxically, both complicates and enriches these questions. The consistency of themes across cultures, the sophistication of early scientific knowledge, and the abrupt emergence of complex societies all leave room for speculation. That speculation, however, must be tempered by archaeological rigor. For every story of divine intervention, there is evidence of human ingenuity. For every cosmic narrative, there are layers of socio-political context. Still, the fascination endures because human beings are narrative creatures. We seek origins, we seek purpose, we seek connection to something greater than ourselves. Whether the Anunnaki were literal sky gods or the symbolic embodiment of human aspiration, they anchor one of the oldest stories humanity ever wrote. They represent the moment when human beings first looked at their own achievements, writing, irrigation, geometry, city building, and asked, "How did we learn all this?" The answer they gave, in the absence of modern scientific explanation, was elegant and profound. Civilization itself was a gift. In this sense, the Anunnaki myth captures the essence of cultural memory. It compresses centuries of trial, error, innovation, and adaptation into a single dramatic narrative. It personifies the mystery of progress, attributing humanity's sudden leaps to beings who possessed knowledge far beyond mortal capacity. Whether real or imagined, these beings embodied the forces that shaped early human life. The river's unpredictable flooding, the sky's shifting lights, the harshness of droughts, the order of seasons, the promise of renewal. Today, the memory persists in our fascination with ancient mysteries. We explore ruins, decipher tablets, and develop new tools, satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, advanced dating techniques, to uncover the past. Each discovery adds a piece to the puzzle. Some pieces challenge old assumptions, others confirm long-held theories, but no discovery has yet erased the allure of the Anunnaki story. It remains a cornerstone of ancient imagination and modern curiosity, a bridge between myth and history. In a way, the Anunnaki continue to rule not through temples or kings, but through the enduring power of their narrative. They inhabit documentaries, books, films, online debates, and speculative theories. They inspire new generations to look deeper, question more, and seek the origins of civilization. Their story is a reminder that the ancient world was not simple. It was filled with complexities, mysteries, and intellectual achievements that rival our own. The greatest contribution of the Anunnaki myth, perhaps, is the idea that knowledge is sacred. In every tablet that preserves instructions for building a canal, in every star map carved into a palace wall, in every hymn describing cosmic order, we find a reverence for learning. The ancient scribes believed they were custodians of knowledge bestowed from a higher plane. That belief fostered cultures that valued record-keeping, education, astronomy, mathematics, and administration. Even if the gods themselves never walked the earth, the belief that they had inspired humanity to rise above chaos and ignorance. If we strip away the literal interpretations, the deeper truth remains. Civilization does not emerge in a vacuum. It requires vision, discipline, curiosity, and a framework that inspires people to work together. The Anunnaki story offered that framework, a foundation upon which generations could build. And if, on some distant day, archaeologists uncover evidence of an earlier, forgotten civilization, a society destroyed by cataclysm, or a culture whose technological achievements vanished in a flood, then the ancient Sumerians may prove to have preserved something extraordinary in their myths, not merely stories, but memories. Until then, the Anunnaki remain both real and unreal, real in the impact they had on human consciousness, unreal in their elusiveness. They embody that liminal space between fact and imagination, between history and myth, between human and divine. In that space, something profound happens. We understand that the past is not a closed book but a living mystery. And the deeper we dig, the more clearly we hear the ancient voices calling across the ages, inviting us to remember a time when the sky and the earth were not separate realms, but intertwined worlds shaped by beings whose presence forever altered the human journey.